Welcome to Total Retail Talks, your podcast channel for retail knowledge.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Talks. I'm Joe Keenan, Editor-in-Chief of Total Retail. I am joined on today's episode by Mike Maher, who is the CEO of Taylor Stitch. We're going to be talking to Mike a little bit about Taylor Stitch's business, in particular, what it's done to improve its demand forecasting and product development processes in partnership with maker sites, as well as just kind of learn a bit more about Taylor Stitch as well as Michael himself. So thanks for joining me today, Mike.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Great to be here.
So I mentioned the fact that you're the CEO. I also want to note that you're the co-founder of Taylor Stitch. So with that in mind, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your professional background and what led you to launch the company?
I really don't have much of a professional background aside from this. My buddy and I started this right out of school. We'd gone to Babson College. We'd both studied entrepreneurship together. We had an idea to mimic a company called Wicked Campers, which can be found in Australia and New Zealand, as we were abroad in Australia. And at the time we graduated, it was around the easy comparisons from a gas perspective as today, but the gas prices were pretty high and it didn't make a lot of sense to launch that. And his dad had actually brought back custom shirts from business trips to Hong Kong. Mm-hmm. And we called ourselves the perfect medium, 5'9", 175 pounds, and couldn't find a shirt that fit. The Brooks Brothers slim fits were still pretty baggy on us. And then, we kind of went into the department stores and tried on the fashion shirts, if you will, the Tom Fords of the world. And for $490, you're getting a shirt that kind of bits you in the armpit. And we just didn't quite get it. So my business partner, he would just steal his dad's shirts and bring them up to school. His dad inevitably got mad at him because he needed to wear those shirts to work on a daily basis. So he made him some of his own. And so we just kind of became enamored by this idea of, how can we not find a shirt that fits? And we feel like we're pretty normal sized guys. So we ended up going to kind of an old man's store trade show in kind of like the greater New York area, and found the second oldest custom shirt maker in the country, who had a younger generation kind of taking it over. And he agreed to make a shirt that was closer fitting to the body for us. And that was really the launch of the business. And from there, we kind of started to make more and more. And really, it was almost like we were like door-to-door salesmen selling custom shirts in like the 2007 to 2009, just trying to figure out how the heck to do this with absolutely no background. And so we collected a lot of customer information just by talking to people. We were actually sitting there taking measurements. We'd measured probably 1,000 guys over the course of a few years there, and really built like a little business, just kind of going, in many capacities, showing up and sitting at somebody's dining room table, taking measurements for them and ordering them up shirts and figuring out what they liked, what they didn't like. And that kind of informed a lot of how we made our clothes going forward.
Yeah. And like so many founder stories, and yours is a really interesting one, comes out of kind of a personal need for you and your co-founder. You were looking for these types of shirts that fit you well. You didn't think that would be such a hard problem to solve, I guess. And you then go about and launch Taylor Stitch together. So it's kind of an interesting story. I wanted to just follow up for those in the audience that may not be familiar with Taylor Stitch, obviously an apparel brand that you talked about. Tell us a little bit, just give us a quick overview of the brand, talk about your product a little bit, and so that those people that are listening have a better sense of what Taylor Stitch is.
Yeah, so thank you. The brand, as you said, it launched out of a need. We wanted a better fitting shirt. And that better fitting shirt was really interesting. We grew up in the Northeast. It was, probably more preppy. We moved to California where, we'll call this 2007. California and San Francisco specific were really the only place that technology was super pervasive. And so you started to see this very casual workplace, and you started to see that casual workplace permeate the entire country. I remember it was like 2011 or so. I showed up in New York. A buddy was working in banking for, I think, B of A at the time. We went out to lunch and he showed up with, loafers, no socks, jeans, a tucked in shirt and a blazer. I looked at him, I was like, what are you doing? Like, can you do this? And, he kind of said like, yeah, that, this like, it was kind of like the Iron Curtain was falling down on wearing suits to work and, in some capacity. And it like really, kind of, I'm like, man, what we're doing is going to continue to pervade the entire country. And so that really reinforced the fact that, we were making custom shirts at that time. We were also making ready to wear shirts. This idea of a more casual but premium product, especially in the men's environment, was good. Made me feel like we were going to keep getting bigger and bigger. And very anecdotal, but it reinforced everything that we were doing. And so really we've been on that kind of continuous train for the last 10, 15 years here, where we make premium products for men in like to kind of take care of your entire wardrobe. Yeah. Everything from t-shirts to sweaters to button-up shirts to outerwear to jeans and khakis, and it definitely has a more rugged tilt to it. I think like one of the things that differentiates Taylor Stitch from a lot of the products you get is like when you grab our product, it feels weighty. It feels like there's substance to it, and that it's going to last a long time. And that comes from, I grew up about 15 minutes from LL Bean. And so that was always kind of my North Star, both from a product and a customer service perspective growing up. And, we lived in bean boots. My family had bean boots from the 70s that we'd, epoxy the holes on. And there was like an agrarian ruggedness to the way that we lived. And so I kind of look at Taylor Stitches. It still has a little bit of that, but it's these kind of that nature moved to California and let its hair down a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it. And if you're going to talk and have an influence in terms of product quality, I guess LL Bean's a great company to aspire to. So you gave that example, and that's almost 10, 11 years ago. With the, when you meet your buddy and what he's wearing. There's obviously been many shifts since those last 11, 12 years, and then obviously the impact of the pandemic and how that's factored into consumer behavior in the last 2 years. Tell us a little bit about kind of this most recent shift that we've seen in consumer behavior, a lot of it driven by the pandemic, and what impact that's had on Taylor Stitch's business.
It's really interesting. Like obviously, like, over the course of the last 2-3 years of the pandemic, everybody started doing things like baking bread and crafting and all of those kind of like at home things when they had more time on their hand and they weren't going out to bars and drinking as much. On top of it, like, in the clothing world, everybody became decidedly more comfortable, and people probably wore a lot more sweatpants. For us specifically, our guy, yes, we launched we had a pant called the Opry pant, which is, not our version of a sweatpant, but kind of our version of a jogger per se. And we definitely sold more of those over the pandemic. That being said, our guy, he still kind of gets up and puts on the same thing. Like I look at myself, like every day I still wake up, throw on jeans and a t-shirt and a sweater, or an overshirt or something like that. Like that never changed for me, throughout the entire course of the pandemic. And I don't think it really changed for our customer. So, as funny as it was, like we didn't see a massive impact on the type of things that we sold. Like we've never been a big suit or, sport wear, like jacket and slacks business. So everybody just kind of kept buying what they did. There was probably some guys that, maybe dressed up a little bit more in the office that now didn't need to. So they bought more of our stuff. But it was pretty steady as she goes for the most part. So we didn't see a massive change, which was nice. I think like that's a thing that I really love about our business is that it is steady. We're not fashion oriented. Guys' fashion, as a, I don't want to call it fashion, but guys' style hasn't changed, too dramatically over the course of the last, 60, 70 years in many capacities. It's gotten more casual, but you still wake up and you put on a button down shirt, or you put on a t-shirt, you put on a sweater and a pair of jeans or khakis and, throw your wallet in your pocket, grab your sunglasses and like head out into the day.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great way to kind of look at it. There are, I'm sure, some challenges associated with accurately capturing demand level for products. Maybe if it's even when you're interested in rolling out a new product, or you have some products that are your best sellers and you want to grow more of that, sales. Tell us a little bit about, what you're doing to kind of capture demand level for products and accurately forecast that demand.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think this is the biggest challenge that any retail company, no matter how big or small you are, has. I mean, if you're not talking to your customer at all, you're kind of, licking your finger and sticking it into the wind and trying to see which way it's blowing. The first thing we ever did was in 2015, and this was a factor of not having ever worked in retail and not really knowing how to plan inventory or what an inventory planning function was. We built what we called the workshop, which is kind of, what we call our internal crowdfunding platform, much akin to a Kickstarter. We launch a new product in the workshop every single week. And we kind of like pushed inventory planning back on our customer to kind of get a better idea of what type of product they want. On top of that, the other thing we do is we always just try and underproduce. We'd rather make less product and sell out and capture a better margin than, overproduce, have to mark things down a ton, ruin brand and price integrity for the business. So that was the first thing we did. And then when Maker Sites came around, that allowed us to really start to, buy into product without doing just, workshop launches with a lot more decisiveness, because we had that data from our customer base, where we basically went, the base of Maker Sites is going to your customers and saying, hey, here's the product. Do you guys want to buy it? And like what, using that as a level of confidence based on sales, and getting smarter and smarter about that over time.
Yeah, and that's a perfect lead in, Mike, in terms of, I mentioned the relationship between Taylor Stitch and Maker Sites. Tell us a little bit about that solution and what it's done to improve the demand forecasting, that product development research that you're able to, that valuable feedback you're able to gain from your customer base.
Yeah, so as we were scaling, kind of like what I was just saying, we were struggling to determine the amount of product and merchandise we needed to meet the growing demands with our customer, without overproducing. And so it was also critical that we keep pace with the evolving trends and minimize the supply chain risk. So, being able to incrementally release consumer-led styles rather than, letting on a few major seasonal drops, which is, how we've always done it. We've always believed that, you can get the customer to come back more and more just by launching a little bit of product here and there. It's also not as much of a working capital suck all at once, so kind of like keep that kind of flywheel going. But really, we wanted to better understand what our customer wanted in using Maker Sites. So, we're obviously in touch with our customers. We wanted to have a better way to evaluate the buyer preferences and purchase intent during that whole product development process to guide those merchandising decisions. And we need to help collect objective product specific consumer feedback and make it accessible to everyone in the organization, which is another thing. I've talked to Dan, the founder of Maker Sites, a million times about this, on runs together, but it's amazing how many businesses aren't making information like this accessible across the organization. I think my favorite example, we will leave the name of the probably Fortune 100 retailer out of it, but walked in and somebody from the merchandising team, and somebody from the marketing team shook hands, and I think both of them said, "You must work for Maker Sites." And this is in a singular department, not from very disparate corners of the a many thousand person organization. But it just it blows my mind, even down to smaller companies where how is everybody not on the same page about the the customer and the product? And so that was it was a clear it was a clear problem that needed to be solved. And so yeah, we've been using Maker Sites since the very beginning. It's allowed us to achieve iterative, consumer obsessed and sustainably responsible approach to developing products and assortments. And those are incredibly important things for us in our business. And we always want to we believe that leading with data and not with ego from a merchandising perspective is really the only way forward in consumer. You've watched you've watched like large merchandising led businesses in many capacities get kind of taken out at the knees by not listening to their customer and using, you know, that voice of customer as a key piece.
So you've talked a little bit, Mike, in terms of some of the business benefits that Taylor Stitch has realized by working with maker sites. You talked about, you know, you're making decisions led by data. You're, you know, making the correct inventory purchases, which are preventing overstocks. And of course, overstocks lead to discount pricing, which then impacts margin. So there's kind of that domino effect. So you're making those correct inventory buys. And you talked about, you know, obviously there's financial benefits to that, but I want to dig into the second part that you mentioned there in terms of the sustainability benefits a little bit more. Talk about that piece of the equation and why that's a core brand value for Taylor Stitch and how that commitment to sustainability is really manifested across the organization.
Yeah, so we were kind of built on this kind of like responsibility, sustainability mission by mistake. You know, our kind of whole thing with, you know, again, like going back to that whole LL Bean methodology, like we wanted to build products that last. You know, at the end of the day, that's the only thing we cared about was how do we build something that's going to be around, you know, as long as we are, you know, like I said, things like resolable Goodyear welted boots, like raw denim jeans that wear in with you, wax canvas jackets, all those things that are going to be there for a long period of time. And the most responsible thing you can do is build something that's not going to end up in a landfill. 85% of clothing, that includes that which we donate, ends up in a landfill every year. So, you know, that's a huge piece of it. But, you know, one thing that we want to make sure of is that there is no trash, you know, and maker sites really helps us by determining how much we should buy. Because the last thing we don't want to do is like the more we buy, the more waste we're creating, the more resources we're sucking up by, you know, having to produce these products. You know, like we're not existing in a vacuum. And, you know, we like to think that we exist in much the same way that Patagonia does, where listen, if you don't need to buy this, don't buy it. You know, we kind of have this, like, we have this internal joke where if we do a good enough job making product that lasts, you know, we should put ourselves out of business because nobody needs more product.
Yeah.
You know, the reality is that we live in like a very consumer centric world where, you know, if people are going to be buying stuff, we want them to be buying our stuff that's going to last a really long time and give them opportunities to fix that or resell it, you know, and kind of like keeping things out of the waste stream as much as humanly possible.
And I guess that could be a differentiation point for your customer too. Obviously, you know, everyone wants quality product, and you're producing quality product at a valuable price, or what they view as a valuable price. But that sustainability might push them over the edge. There's obviously so much competition in the market that could really speak to the customer and make them ultimately buy from Taylor Stitch.
Yeah, and we you know, one thing that we talk a lot about is cost per wear. You know, yeah, you can go buy something cheap and, you know, you might get a few wears out of it and it starts to break down. But, you know, you might pay $350 for a pair of our boots, or, you know, $150, $200 for a pair of our jeans. But, you know, when you know that those are going to last for, you know, 10, 20, 30 years, you know, depending on how much you wear them and like how well you treat them, like, you know, all of a sudden the cost per wear goes down dramatically. And I think this is, you know, I think guys have a strong feeling about this as well. Like I call it, we're simple beasts. You know, we don't like things to change generally that much. You know, I want to be able to go back to my favorite old standbys. Like I want my jeans to feel like sweatpants. You know, I want my boots to feel like sneakers, you know, and that comes with like having them being, you know, super worn in and making things that look better with age, not worse.
So it's interesting that what was it, cost to wear? Is that idea that I think that's really interesting, because you don't really think about that in apparel, and then how much usage are you getting out of it? You know, we think about that with some other products, but, you know, for apparel, that really hasn't been thought about enough, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree. And I think, yeah, like everything that any consumer buys should be thought about. It's like, how much are you actually going to use this? You know, how long is this thing going to last? And I think like that starts to get you to like almost like your own personal responsibility metric from a consumer, is like, am I going to actually, wear this thing out? And I've always been on the fan of like, I'd rather invest in nice things and take care of them. Because like, at the end of the day, it's cheaper than buying stuff that you're gonna have to throw away shortly.
Yeah. I mean, we think about that with, I was just having this conversation about buying something for our home and a new water heater. And I'm like, well, you get the value out of it. You might spend a little more up front, but if you get the right one, and it lasts you 12 years and you got your money's worth, like we don't think about getting our money's worth, so to speak, so much with clothes, but it really does resonate there as well. So my final question, Mike, in terms of, you've built this brand and, it's been successful. You want to continue that positive momentum. Where are you focused on as you look at growth opportunities for Taylor Stitch? Not just for this year, but just continuing the business going forward.
Yeah, it's funny when people, like, I was just with somebody else and they asked me like, what's your kind of 5-year vision? And, like my answer to this really is we focus on a yearly basis. Our business, we don't have any crazy technology that we're working on. And, we're really just trying to make better product every single year. And so we play a lot of small ball. The opportunities lie in continue to make better product and continuing to foster a better customer experience and continuing to care more about those customers. And I think a lot of people are out there looking for a silver bullet right now. Especially as from like a growth perspective with iOS 14 changing and you not being able to follow people around the internet the same way you used to. But my whole perspective on growth is, this game of e-commerce is a long doubleheader of baseball. You're going out and you're hitting a lot of singles and doubles over the course of the day to drive a lot of runs in. And for us, it's, over the course of many years. And we look at this from 100-year perspective versus a 2-year perspective, because I think that's how great brands are built. And I think the brand, I think we've seen this with many brands in the recent, we'll call it decade, that have raised a ton of growth capital, gone super fast at customer acquisition, maybe haven't fostered the best product or the best customer experience. And, they were kind of like the customers end up getting left out to dry, or the brand goes and buys too much inventory. Maybe they're not using maker sites as well as, they should be. But they end up in this kind of space where nobody cares about them anymore. And I never want to put Taylor Stitch in a position where, anybody looks at it as a discount brand or, as anything but, a brand that's creating amazing premium product that's going to last a really long time. And so, we focus on things like sourcing the best fibers we can, sourcing responsible fibers, building product that's going to last, knowing that when we service our customer well, they're going to keep coming back again and again and again. And that, that's proven by our plus 40% customer repeat rates, on a 12-month basis. And, those are the things that we stay just maniacally focused on.
Yeah.
And I think if all brands did that, I think we'd have a more responsible consumer culture. And B, I think you'd have a lot more healthier, profitable brands than the ones that are kind of chasing the dragon, so to say, on trying to create hyper growth, in a place that I honestly just don't believe needs to see hyper growth.
Yeah. And with the growing cost of acquisition channels, it's just retention. Sometimes that's the real key to growth. And a lot of businesses aren't really looking at it that way and going after solely acquisition, and it's not profitable either. So it's a good perspective.
Yeah. And that there's going to be there are some great breakout products and brands that have like a very, they open and enter a new space and they are the market leader. I mean, Lululemon did this for yoga pants, and many other things, but as a whole, we're not existing in a land grab market. This isn't Uber and Lyft. There's going to be enough people buying clothes. Fortunately or unfortunately, we got to put clothes on every day. So there's going to be people that continue to buy those for a long period of time, and if we can capture a percentage of the market that cares about wearing things that are nice and last a long time, we're going to have a very healthy business for a long time.
That's a great way, I think, to wrap up this conversation. I want to take the opportunity to thank Michael Maher, the co-founder and CEO of Taylor Stitch, for joining us on this episode of Total Retail Talks, telling us a little bit about its business as well as its relationship with Maker Sites. So thanks for joining me today, Michael.
Joe, thanks for having me. This was a blast. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Talks is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Talks.